his friend. He cannot know what he really is.
Probably not. Mr. Darcy's pride has often led him to display hospitality, to relieve the poor, to be a careful guardian to his sister.
What sort of girl is Miss Darcy?
As a child, she was extremely fond of me. But she has become proud like her brother. Indeed, they are both much like their aunts, Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
I've heard only lately of Lady Catherine, from Mr. Collins. She sounds an arrogant, conceited woman.
Her daughter, Mr. Burke, will have a very large fortune, and it is believed she and Darcy will unite the two estates. I would say that the two are perfectly matched.
I hope your plans to join the regiment will not be affected by Mr. Darcy being in the neighborhood.
Oh, no, Miss Bennet. It is not for me to be driven away by Mr. Darcy. If he wishes to avoid seeing me, he must go. His behavior to myself has been scandalous, but his father was the truest friend I ever had.
Elizabeth went away with her head full of Mr. Wickham. She could think of nothing but him and everything he had told her all the way home. The next day, she related to Jane everything that passed between Mr. Wickham and herself.
They have both been deceived, I dare say. I cannot believe Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's friendship, nor can I question the veracity of a man of amiable appearance such as Mr. Wickham.
But Jane, surely we may be obliged to think ill of somebody.
It is distressing. One knows not what to think.
I beg your pardon. One knows exactly what to think.
The ball at Netherfield.
Mr. Collins wishes to make an announcement regarding the ball.
I am by no means of the opinion, I can assure you, that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character, could have any evil tendency. Indeed, I take this opportunity of soliciting your hand, Miss Elizabeth, for the first two dances especially.
Elizabeth had hoped to be asked by Mr. Wickham for those very dances. She accepted Mr. Collins' invitation with as good as grace as she could.
The ball at Netherfield.
Elizabeth searched in vain for Mr. Wickham. She was soon informed he'd been obliged to go to town.
London.
On business. She felt certain Mr. Darcy's presence was the true reason behind Mr. Wickham's absence.
Well, Lizzie, you're very popular tonight.
Charlotte, whatever could Mr. Darcy mean by coming this way?
I dare say you'll find him very agreeable.
Heaven forbid! That would be the greatest misfortune of all, to find a man agreeable who wants to turn into hate. It is generous to Mr. Bingley to hold this ball.
Yes, indeed.
It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance. You ought to make some kind of remark on the size of the room or number of couples.
I assure you I will say whatever you wish me to say.
Very well. A reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones. For now, you may be silent.
Do you talk as a rule while dancing?
One must speak a little, you know.
Do you and your sisters often walk to Meryton?
We do. When you met us there, we just been forming a new acquaintance.
Yes, Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure him making friends. Whether he is equally capable of retaining them is less certain.
hearing you once say, Mr. Darcy, that your resentment, when once created, is unappeasable. You must be very cautious, I suppose, in its being created.
I am.
And never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice.
I hope not. May I ask what this questions tend?
I'm trying to make out your character.
And what is your success?
I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you that puzzle me exceedingly. But if I do not take in your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity.
I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours.
Jane dances with Bingley.
Elizabeth imagines Jane married to Mr. Bingley.
Mrs. Bennet embarrasses herself.
Mr. Collins embarrasses himself.
Mary, an extremely dull gal, embarrasses herself. But no one seems to notice.
Elizabeth thinks that had her family made an agreement to embarrass themselves as much as ever, they could not have played their parts with greater success.
Mr. Bingley seems not to have noticed any of it.
While Mr. Darcy looked on in silent contempt.
Another letter.
My dear Cassandra, we had a visit yesterday morning from Mr. Tom Lefroy. He has but one fault, which time will, I trust, entirely remove. It is that his morning coat is a great deal too light. I look forward with anticipation to tomorrow night, as I expect to receive an offer from my friend in the course of the evening. I shall refuse him, however, unless he promises to give away his white coat.
It does sound as if they really loved each other, doesn't it?
It does seems like Austen had feelings for Tom Lefroy and he for her, but it was easily quashed. He was sent away, probably by his aunt, to prevent any further involvement with a girl with no dowry. With 17 people depending on him, I guess he wasn't willing to take the chance.
At length, the day has come to which I flirt my last with Tom Lefroy. And when you receive this, it will be over. My tears flow as I write at the melancholy idea. And I will never see him again. With best love and etc., I am ever yours, J. Austen.
Mr. Collins proposes.
May I hope, madam, for the honor of a private audience with your fair daughter Elizabeth this morning?
Oh dear, of course. I'm sure Lizzie will be very happy. Come, girls, I want you upstairs.
Dear Mum, do not go. I beg you will not go.
Nonsense, Lizzie. I insist upon you hearing Mr. Collins in privacy.
My dear Miss Elizabeth, you can hardly doubt the purpose of my discourse. Almost as soon as I entered this house, I singled you out as the companion of my future life. But before I run away with my feelings on the subject, let me state my reasons for marrying. First, I think it a right thing for every clergyman to set the example of matrimony. Secondly, I am convinced it will add very greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, it is the particular advice and recommendation of my noble patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. As I am to inherit this estate after the death of your honored father, I felt I ought to direct my desires here. And now nothing remains for me but to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection.
You are too hasty, sir. Accept my thanks for the compliments you are paying me, but I must decline your proposal.
I'm well aware it is usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept. I'm by no means discouraged by what you've just said and hope to lead you to the altar ere long.
Upon my word, I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You cannot make me happy, and I'm perfectly convinced I'm the last woman in the world that can make you so.
I know it is the established custom of your sex to
Really,
reject
Mr. Collins? You puzzle me exceedingly. I know not how to express my refusal in a way that may convince you.
I flatter myself that your refusal is merely the usual practice of elegant females.
Can I speak plainer? Consider me now not as a female, but as a rational creature, speaking the truth from my heart.
Mrs. Bennet came to congratulate Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins related the particulars of the interview.
Depend upon it, Mr. Collins, Lizzie shall be brought to reason. Mr. Bennet, you must come and make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him.
Of what are you talking?
Of Lizzie and Mr. Collins. Lizzie declares she will not have Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins begins to say he will not have Lizzie.
And what am I to do on the occasion? It seems a hopeless business.
Talk to Lizzie about it yourself. Tell her you insist upon her marrying him.
Let her be called in. She shall hear my opinion.
Lizzie, come at once. Your father wishes to speak with you.
Come here, child. I understand that Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage. Is it true?
It is, sir.
And this offer of marriage you have refused?
I have, sir.
Very well. We have come to the point. Your mother insists upon your accepting it. Is it not so, Mrs. Bennet?
Yes, I shall never see her again.
An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins. And I will never see you again if you do.
Mr. Bennet, you promised to insist upon her marrying him. Lizzie, who is to maintain you when your father is dead? I shall not be able to keep you. In fact, I shall never speak to you again.
Mr. Wickham visits Elizabeth.
Not that I haven't pleasure in talking about it. Nobody can tell what I suffer, but those who complain are never pitied.
Mr. Wickham visits Elizabeth.
We are all sorry that your business prevented you from attending the ball in Netherfield.
In truth, my absence was self-imposed. I found that as the time drew near, to be in the same room with him for so many hours together might be more than I could bear. And that unpleasantness might arise for others.
Your discretion suits you well. Would that others conduct themselves with the same dignity?
I fear that Mr. Darcy
Jane
is not
receives
one.
a letter from Caroline Bingley.
Mr. Wickham visits Elizabeth.
Jane receives a letter.
Jane receives a letter from Caroline Bingley.
Mr. Bingley has left Netherfield. His sister writes that they are on their way to town.
London!
Never coming back. Jane, listen to what she writes. Mr. Darcy is impatient to see his sister Georgiana, as we are all. My brother greatly admires Mr. Darcy's sister, and will now have frequent opportunity of seeing her. I hope for an event which will secure both his happiness and hers.
You cannot permit this to upset you.
But you can see from the letter that I have entirely mistaken Mr. Bingley's feelings towards me.
I assure you, Mr. Bingley has no intention of marrying Mr. Darcy's sister.
But is it not clear enough? Does she not expressly declare that she is perfectly convinced of her brother's indifference?
Caroline is trying to keep him away from you, and this is her method.
Will Jane and Bingley connect to each other again? Will Mrs. Bennet marry off her daughters? Will Elizabeth and Darcy find true love? Come back after intermission to find out. Remember, unlike most modern novelists, Jane Austen was not afraid of a happy ending.